So when you're developing your cash flow projection, here are some key assumptions you need to look at. The first being the sales side of it. So you want to understand what your forecast for sales is, and that includes talking to your customers around margins and pricing and making sure you're comfortable with that. The second component is looking at cost. So you want to understand, is the cost of the product, is a portion of it variable, say it's a commodity based, or is there fixed pricing in there? So you really want to understand your cost side of it to get your margins right. The third component is capital. So you really want to look at the equipment, how much the cost of the equipment is a portion of it variable, is it how fast the equipment runs, etc. But there's a couple of areas that people miss in their capital costs, and one is transition costs, so you may have to build up inventory for that. The other component is IT, that could be an essential part of your cost too. And then also what you want to build in a contingency for your capital, because you may want to modify the equipment as you go along, because there may be benefits that you don't realize till later on. The fourth component is looking at working capital. So you may want to look at, do you need to build up inventory, accounts receivable, et cetera, and work that into your cash flow projections. The other component you want to look at then is your tax rate. So you want to understand, is there changes in your tax rate? Is there other benefits from a tax perspective that this project gives you? Once you've got all those components together, now you have the ability to do your internal rate of return and your payback in years, and that'll gauge whether or not the project makes sense. So when you're doing your cash flow projections, the amount of detail you should get involved in really kind of varies by project, but typically my experience is you really need to get comfortable with about 80% of the project in detail. What you don't want to do is, from that 80 to 100% takes a lot of time, and it may not make sense for the project. So you really want to get comfortable about 80% of the business, 80% of the project. What I look at is, from that standpoint, is you also want to be able to answer what I call the 5 whys. So typically, my experience in these projects, investors want to know, sort of really dig into the numbers, and they'll ask you sort of 5 questions, 5 whys in a row. You want to be able to answer those 5 whys. You may not get them all, but if you only get 2 of those whys, there's kind of a mistrust after that. So you really want to be able to dig down to the numbers and understand that. But also too, when you do present to them, don't present at a very detailed level. Don't show them a bunch of spreadsheets. Show them a high-level overview of the project. Let them ask those questions. Really, at the end of the day, you want them to be comfortable with it, but taking them through detailed information in spreadsheets isn't really going to get you there. So really, my focus has always been, get 80% there, show the investors a summary of what you're looking at, and let them ask the questions. And again, make sure you're prepared for those 5 whys. First of all, the world is a global world, so you really want to focus on, is there risk around a global standpoint impacting the product? You also want to look at foreign exchange. Foreign exchange can vary dramatically over the year. So if you're looking at a 5 to 10 year projection, what's your thoughts on foreign exchange? The other component is really understanding your customers. How is your customer going to react to this product? What's the interest from your customer base? And the last component that people really ignore is competitors. How will the competitor react to this product? Will there be a pricing war? Will there be the issues that they're going to compete against you that you haven't thought about? So it's really trying to understand the product, not just from internal aspects, but also looking externally and what are the risks around that. And really trying to cover that off, and or, for example, on the foreign exchange side, do you hedge the capital for this project? That way you've minimized the risk on the exchange side of it. But again, think outside of your company and look at globally what impacts we'll have. So when you should review your cash projections on an annual basis, probably 6 to 12 months after the project has started. It's really important to get some data points so you don't have to, so you can correlate the data and analyze it, and really understand, say, a postmortem on the project. What are the benefits of the project? What are the costs, if there's any cost overruns or issues? But really understanding that project helps you look at projects going forward and maybe mistakes you've made or things you want to improve upon. But I think typically my experience is sort of 6 to 12 months after the project, make sure you review it, and then sometimes even, say, a couple of years into the project, go back and review your numbers. But my experience is a lot of companies don't do that, and it's a very important part of the project to really learn and understand what you did right and what you did wrong. And so you can apply that to projects going forward. So a couple of external factors you may want to consider that typically people don't pay attention to are as customers. So for example, you also want to look at how a customer is going to react to a new product, understanding what their future plans are. I've had experience in the past where we looked at new formats for a product, but our customer was changing their format. So you really want to understand what their thoughts are before you really focus in an area that's going to change their product. The other component is looking at competitors. People underestimate competitors. My experience is that your competitor is going to react. They don't necessarily idly buy while you make changes. So to really try and understand what your competitor is going to do going forward is also important and should be factored into your cash flow projections. The other component is looking at government regulations. For example, in the sugar business, there's duties that are renewed every 5 years. So there's a possibility of 5 years from now, those duties won't be renewed. What does that mean to your cash flow projections? What does that mean to your overall profitability of the project? So it's really trying to understand and work those into the numbers. And I think at the end of the day, you want to have a well-rounded look at the business, but also consider external factors also.